Let's talk about stamping and masking today. The latest release, which was our spring 2023 IOD release, we have this really beautiful vintage pastoral, almost rural scene that's going on. And what's really great about these two stamps is that you literally can build your landscape any way you want it. And it has a combination of like lots of really sweet little animals, different barns, cottages, windmills, just a lot of really interesting variety. So if you don't do people so much, you don't have to worry about that. You've got lots of animals and farms and whatnot. But then there are a bunch of like really cute little people scenes, which are really fun as well. So having said that, I'm gonna walk you through the basics of masking. So we're going to do a very simple scene. And what I like to do is kind of just practice one, get it laid out so I have a general idea of my my masks that are going to be necessary, and then I just dive right in. So I've already set aside all of the things I need to make this little scene down here. And then the other thing too is when you are pulling all of your masks out, because they're so tiny, it's really easy to lose them. And I kid you not, I've lost so many over the years that this just kind of works for me. So what I've done is I took a little bit of painter's tape and I secured the little masks that I'm using for this particular project and sort of set them aside. It just makes it easiest for me, and I'm not freaking out about losing all those little pieces. Now, our project today is actually going to be stamping on watercolor tags because I think that this scene lends itself beautifully to watercolor. And if you don't draw, it's a perfect way to have these sweet little landscapes without having to worry about drawing. We're going to begin by stamping out our little sheep. And you've got this little cluster right here as well as this little single. So we'll go ahead and grab the cluster to start with. And then you're just going to lay it onto your cling mount. And you can play around with the foreground, horizon line, all of that sort of stuff. I know that that usually sounds pretty scary for people and they're like, I have no idea what that even means. So don't worry about it. It's okay. I know that we're going to lose some of our sheep here. So maybe what we do is kind of just pop a few in, deciding which ones I want. I really like this little guy sleeping here on the side. So I'm just going to go ahead and ink that up. And because we're using watercolor, we want to make sure that the ink we choose is a permanent ink and it's not water soluble. Okay. And the other thing that I like to do is use sepia colored ink because it sort of disappears into your washes of watercolor. And it's just kind of a good cheat. So I'm going to come up probably about 3/4 of an inch just because I want to make sure that there's room for the foreground to get stamped. So just gently apply pressure and then you have those little clusters sitting there. Now I mentioned I wanted to do the standing sheep. So we'll go ahead and use our mask for that. Just grab the little single. And I know that like I want him to be, I don't know, probably like standing back here. So I'll mask that out with this little cluster here. Actually, I think it's this one. Yeah. So you kind of just have to figure out which masks go where, and they've printed them in the same layout as the stamps. So assuming that you put your stamps back in the right order on the sheet, you should be fine and it shouldn't be too hard to find them. So I've laid that mask down. That way I can go ahead and stamp this standing sheep without messing up the one that's laying down. So it's just perfectly tucked back there. And then just sort of wipe off any of the excess ink and then attach it back to your painter's tape so you're not losing it again. So now that I've done that, I can go ahead and decide which of the foregrounds I want to go with. And they've got lots of little areas for you to pick from, so you don't have to you know, worry too many about choices. You've got lots and lots of choices. I think this small little hill is going to be perfect. You have to keep in mind too, like, where are they standing? If you have this hill too high up, you're gonna go where their heads are. If you have the hill too far down, these two guys up here are sort of floating up in the air. So we're just going to go ahead and mask out again. And this one's only gonna go kind of half on. I will pull this one back out. Oops. I always forget which way it goes. There we go. And then we've also got this little guy standing, so we'll lay down that mask as well. So once our little scene is all protected, we can go ahead and stamp our foreground. Careful you don't knock it while you're inking everything up. And I'm gonna come up pretty high. Otherwise, like I said, those sheep are gonna be kind of floating, which doesn't make any sense. And then you can kind of scooch the masks off. And now you've got the foreground kind of behind the sheep, and it makes a bit more sense. So we'll go ahead and stamp another little scene here. And because my tags are kind of tiny, I think I'm just gonna go with the windmill. And that becomes kind of like your horizon line right here, and we can do sky above it, and you could do field or whatever you wanted in the midground there. So it's just a matter of like playing with the layouts. They don't have to be scary. Just play, you know? So now you've got these cute little sheep with field in the center, you've got room for sky, and you've got foreground. If you wanted to, you could add more detail in the foreground. And I kind of get a kick out of the little bushes and stuff like that, but then you also have things that could be used as bushes or trees, clouds. So I'm gonna come in and actually stamp some clouds too, just because I think it'll be more interesting. So those could technically be bushes, but they could technically be clouds. So, you know, just kind of play around a little bit. And I'll just change the orientation of this one so it's coming off just a little bit. And then you've got some fluffy little clouds up there. Did I just sound like Bob Ross? Okay, so when it's time to actually paint that, you'll go ahead and heat set it for a couple of seconds with your heat tool. And that way you don't have to worry about it reactivating with your watercolor. So I'm gonna go ahead and start with a really pretty sky color. You could go with something really vibrant like ultramarine, but I really do prefer a cerulean blue. It's just a little bit softer. So I'm gonna kind of come in and paint around my little clouds. I'll change up the value, which just basically means, you know, sometimes you have more water, sometimes you have more paint. It just keeps the sky looking that much more interesting. Leave a little bit of white in there. Don't feel like you have to paint everything. And then if you switch up to something like yellow ochre, kind of in the mustardy family, it'll be a really nice little field here in the center. Kind of just paint in and around all the little sheep. And then because you would probably have a little bit of shadow underneath that mill, I'm just going to do a little bit of moon glow while that yellow ochre is still wet. And that just adds a bit more depth to your scene. And then I want to add in a little bit of green. So I'll come in and actually splat a little bit of green in there. Now some of that green landed in my sky and I'm not gonna worry about it. It's okay. Just kind of touching those little splats with a little bit of water on my brush. And then because these guys are sort of propped up here, I'll change the green to something more like a sap green. The first one I used was green apatite. A little bit of green apatite. It's a deeper green, which is really great for kind of suggesting some shadow in and around where the little sheep are laying. Now I didn't quite bring all of that yellow ochre down kind of in between the sheep's legs here, so I'm just going to drop in a bit more. And a lot of that yellow got lost in the green, so I'm just going to drop in a bit more wet into wet. A lot of this is still very, very wet. All right, let's go ahead and dry it up. Let's go with something in the pigmentite color range. As I progress with the scene, I'm just going to continue to add glowing colors. So basically things like Quin Deep Gold or Aussie Red Gold. These are all really beautiful golden colors that will add sunshine to your piece. And if I just pretend or assume that the sun is being cast from the right side of my scene, all of the stuff on the right is going to be brighter and lighter. Most of the shadow is cast to the left of this entire scene, and that's based on the stamp. You'll notice that all of the striations and the shadow lines are already done for you, so you just kind of continue to follow along that line. I'm also adding in some more moon glow. I'm just kind of deepening all of the shadowy areas to create more depth and interest in my piece. And I'll continue by adding a few more darker shadows on the left side of the building as well. You could very easily just leave the sheep white and kind of allow the brown ink, sepia, to actually speak for the interest in the sheep's coats. But I like adding a little bit of Payne's gray in just to add a little more interest. You'll find sometimes that when your watercolor dries, the colors look a little flat. They don't have as much interest. They're not as vibrant as you were hoping for. And this is when a glaze of color becomes really helpful. So if you just come in with additional colors and add soft washes over already dried layers, you'll get really, really beautiful, vibrant patches of color. And I'm going to just add in rich green gold down here. It's another really great sunshiny kind of green. So it's basically going to add a lot of sun to the front of my foreground. I'm also going to splat in some burgundy yellow ochre. I really, really like the suggestion of flowers with splatter. And just, generally speaking, splatter is totally my jam. When it comes to the clouds, I'm really, really a fan of moody and broody. It's just sort of my thing. So I'm adding blue apatite in and just kind of kissing the little cloud scene with my brush. And then I'll come in and add additional layers and fluffiness around them as well. Down at the base of the structure, I'm going to go ahead and add in a bit more shadow. This is just more blue apatite. And again, it's just giving more depth and interest to your painting.
And although the scene is really pretty as is, I really enjoy adding just a tiny splash of color. So throwing in a little bit of Quinn Rose to suggest that maybe there was some bougainvillea crawling over the base of that structure, as well as some little burgundy colored flowers at the front and the foreground, just add a little bit more interest. When it's time to pull the tape, always pull slowly and gently away from your painting. Don't pull towards the center of the painting because you can actually pull the paper up and rip it. So I'm very, very careful when I'm pulling off the tape, but it's just a very simple process of keeping the paper from buckling as well as leaving a really pretty little white border around your piece. To finish off the scene, I'm just going to do a sketchy little line. This is using a pen called Platinum Carbon Ink fountain pen. It is a permanent ink once dried, and obviously it's a really fun tip, so who doesn't love a fountain pen? But I really like the idea of creating an illustrative little border around the entire scene. It could be something in your art journal, or you could add it to a present, or simply just have little tags to practice your watercolor. To finish it off, I'll just add a little bit of ribbon, snip off my edges, and your little tag is ready to go. I hope you enjoyed this little lesson, and happy stamping and painting.